Hi, everyone. I am David Lipton, creator of the podcast series The Reckoning, July 4th, 2030. I am introducing an experimental series of AI generated conversations, complements of Notebook LM. These conversations are based entirely on my podcasts. They are called the Deep Dive series. Just imagine two of your friends discussing my podcasts and enjoy the conversations.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Ready to take a trip to the future?
Always up for a little time travel. Where are we headed?
2030, to be exact.
Okay, now you've got my attention. 2030, huh?
We're diving into this podcast called The Reckoning, July 4, 2030.
The Reckoning, huh? Sounds ominous.
Well, this episode, the JFK Challenge, it really got us thinking. Big questions about America, you know.
Like what? Give me the broad strokes.
We're talking national ideals, the economy, what our generation is leaving behind. It's a lot.
It's a lot to unpack, for sure. What's got you hooked?
The way this future podcast uses history to talk about now, you know. Like, they start with this quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you."
Hold on. Isn't that...
JFK, ask what you can do for your country.
Right.
1961. But here's the thing.
He still resonates in 2030. Wow.
Exactly. Over 60 years later. And it's like, boom, still relevant. It's kind of amazing. And get this. They even talk about the Kennedy $50.
No way. That's pretty specific. Are they saying we should all go dig them out of our coin jars or something?
Kind of. But it's more about what those coins represent, you know.
All those inscriptions, right? Liberty, in God we trust, e pluribus unum. Like, it's literally stamping American identity onto the currency.
Exactly. It's like a tangible reminder right in your pocket. And speaking of enduring values, they also get into Thomas Jefferson.
Of course they do. You can't talk about America without a little Jefferson. What'd they focus on?
Equality, limited government, the classics.
The classics, like togas and stuff.
Well, more like the Founding Fathers being inspired by ancient Rome. Architecturally, I mean. Like the Capitol Dome. It's based on the Pantheon.
Whoa. I never made that connection. So they were into that whole Roman Republic vibe, trying to build something that lasts, huh?
Totally. And they were really worried about factions, you know, like
Right.
political groups tearing the country apart. Sound familiar?
Yeah, some things never change, right? Like this fear is baked into the American DNA or something. But it makes sense given their Roman obsession.
Because Rome fell, right?
Exactly. It's like a cautionary tale echoing down through the ages. Don't repeat the mistakes of the past, guys. Learn from the Romans. Find that balance.
Which is funny because they were big on balance, right? Like the whole system of checks and balances.
Totally. They were obsessed with Aristotle's golden mean. You know, finding that sweet spot between extremes, moderation, virtue, all that jazz. They saw it as the key to a lasting republic. It's like that's the foundation, right? The golden mean, checks and balances. This constant search for equilibrium.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's wild how this future podcast connects it to like actual choices America made. Big ones.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
So they talk about this fork in the road back in the 1960s. Basically a shift in priorities with some big economic consequences down the line. That's how they see it in 2030 at least.
Okay, now you've got to elaborate because that's pretty vague. What kind of fork in the road are we talking about?
Think about the 60s, right? The Great Society, the war on poverty.
A push for social programs, expanding the safety net.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, it's not like they're saying it was the wrong move.
Yeah.
It's more like trying to see the whole picture.
The long view, right, because
Right.
they're living with the consequences intended or not in 2030.
Yeah. And they get into some pretty specific economic indicators that started shifting around that time. I mean, we're talking about stuff that still feels super relevant today.
Okay, hit me with it. What kind of indicators?
They talk about declining productivity growth.
Yeah.
So basically, America started producing less with the same amount of effort.
Which, yeah, that has ripple effects everywhere, right? Wages, innovation. It's kind of a big deal.
Huge. And then there's real income stagnation. So people are working just as hard, but their paychecks aren't keeping up with the cost of living.
Tell me about it. That's the story of our lives right now.
Right. And then, of course, there's the rising debt to GDP ratio. Basically, the country starts owing more and more compared to what it's producing.
Yeah, that's a recipe for trouble no matter how you slice it. So they're connecting all of this back to the 60s.
They're careful not to say it's a direct cause and effect thing, but they definitely present it as like, hey, this is happening at the same time. Think about it.
Which is more than enough to spark some serious debate. I can already imagine the think pieces flying around in 2030.
For real. But they don't leave people hanging. They actually recommend a couple of books to dig deeper into these ideas. Have you heard of The Rise and Fall of American Growth? It's by Robert Gordon.
I have. It's a bit of a doorstop, but it really gets into the weeds on those long-term economic trends. Fascinating stuff.
Okay, so it's one of those buckle up, we're going deep kind of reads.
Totally. But worth it if you're into that kind of thing. And the other book.
The High Cost of Good Intentions by John Cogan. Haven't had a chance to dive into that one yet.
That one takes a hard look at America's social safety net, which, ties directly back to those big choices we were talking about earlier.
Oh, interesting. What's the angle?
Well, Kogan's argument is that while these programs were created with, genuinely good intentions, maybe the long-term costs and design weren't fully thought through.
There's that tension again, right? The immediate needs versus the long game.
Yeah.
Individual well-being versus, the system as a whole. It's messy.
And it gets even messier when this future podcast turns its attention to a very specific group of people.
Because up until this point, it's all big picture stuff, right? Historical figures, economic trends, but then hey, this is about you.
Wait, really? They get that specific?
Totally. They zero in on the generation born between 1980 and 2000, the millennials.
No way. So they're talking directly to their audience, this is on you, bold move.
Right. And they don't just say it casually, they call it a get ready for it. A rendezvous with destiny.
Whoa. Okay, that's a pretty loaded phrase. Where have I heard that before?
It's straight out of an FDR speech, a super serious rallying the nation kind of speech.
Wow. Okay, so they're not messing around. It's like they're saying this generation holds the future in their hands. No pressure, right?
Right. And it's funny. Part of me is come on, give us a little credit. We're trying here.
Nah, I feel that. But also, maybe a little tough love is what's needed,
Yeah.
A wake-up call.
Totally. It's they're both optimistic about what this generation can do, but also kind of apologetic about the hand they're being dealt.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of, we kind of messed things up, sorry, not sorry. Which brings us back to the title of the podcast, doesn't it? The Reckoning.
Ooh, good point. What are we reckoning with exactly? Is it purely about economics, or is it something bigger?
Right, because reckoning implies consequences. Right. Choices made, paths taken. It makes you wonder if it's more about values, priorities, the soul of America in the 21st century.
It's a lot to ponder. And the craziest thing, they don't give us any answers. We never find out what actually happens by July 4, 2030. Did things turn around? Did they totally crash and burn? We don't know.
Which is kind of brilliant when you think about it. It's they're saying the ending hasn't been written yet. It's up to you.
It's a total cliffhanger. But I get it. It's about sparking conversation. Right? Getting people to think about the choices we're making today.
Exactly. And hey, if a podcast from the future is what it takes, I'm all for it. It's definitely got us thinking, right?
No doubt. And hey, if you're listening and this whole time-traveling deep dive has piqued your curiosity, we highly recommend checking out The Reckoning, July 4, 2030. Who knows, maybe some of their predictions actually came true. Or maybe they're way off. Either way, it's sure to get those brain cells firing. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.